There are now almost 300 major airports in the United States. The busiest of these set new records every year. On a typical day in 1967, approximately 1,100 landings and takeoffs were made at New York's John F. Kennedy International Airport. Over 77,000 air travelers moved through its terminal buildings in a 24-hour period. In 1966, regional, domestic, and international carriers made over 37 million takeoffs and landings at U.S. airports. To carry 6.5 billion passengers, almost 80 billion air miles. Some of these were repeaters, people who travel frequently by air. But each year, more and more Americans fly. For business or for fun. So even if you've never flown before, the chances are growing that someday soon you will. And when you do, what's happening in aviation today will make it possible for you to fly with greater efficiency and speed in the world of tomorrow.
Taxi weight 248, 807. Gate control, American Flight 3, out on schedule.
American 3 from gate control, out on schedule.
American 3, cleared Los Angeles. Flight plan route 33,000 at Joliet, 31,000 Joliet, Los Angeles. You are cleared to tower frequency. American 3, cleared Los Angeles. Flight plan route 33,000 at Joliet, 31,000 Joliet, Los Angeles. You are cleared to tower frequency.
80 knots. 80 knots. 100's good. V1. Rotate.
Flight procedures are familiar today, even to millions who have never flown. The great achievements of those who work in the field of aviation are also generally known to most of us. But a mere 50 years ago, powered flight was an experience in which only a hardy few took part. It was exciting, but uncertain. The National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, you know it now as NASA, was born in 1915. Its budget was $5,000 a year to supervise and direct the scientific study of the problems of flight with a view to their practical solution. And so an agency for research was born, whose unending probing into the phenomena of flight has played a basic role in the growth of aviation. In these aviation research facilities established years ago, in wind tunnels and laboratories at research centers like Langley in Virginia, at Lewis near Cleveland, Ohio, and at Ames near San Francisco, many first steps were taken to advance the state-of-the-art of powered flight. NASA research working with science and industry has led from piston engine planes of 50 years ago that barely left the ground to supersonic jets and rocket-powered planes that streak above Edwards Flight Test Center on the Mojave Desert. Planes that can reach hypersonic speeds at altitudes so high they merge with space. Aeronautical research resulting in extended flight at faster and faster speeds already has radically altered our concepts of time and space, shrinking the world in which we live today. Air travelers who spend a mere 5 hours crossing the United States today may make this 3,000-mile trip in less than half the time, a few short years from now. This is the supersonic transport. NASA began to do basic research on SSTs in 1956. Today, industry is building the first U.S. supersonic transport. Its movable or variable sweep wings were made possible by research done at Langley years ago. They are extended for landing and takeoff and sweep back for supersonic flight. Powered by huge jet engines, this plane will carry 350 passengers 13 miles high. It will cruise in this cold, thin air at nearly 3 times the speed of sound. The operational version of this mock-up must be efficient at supersonic and subsonic speeds. During its relatively slow takeoff and climb to cruising altitude, the aircraft will cover nearly 300 miles, burn off about 33% of its total fuel supply. Then, even while it soars through air 70 degrees below zero, friction will heat its titanium skin to 450 degrees Fahrenheit. So hot that in flight, this whole airframe will expand a foot in length. NASA research has developed laboratory techniques for simulating this environment on the ground in order to meet the many requirements for actual flight. Both NASA and industry are still studying the overall aerodynamics of the SST, which will carry air crews and passengers through a much more hostile environment than any now known to civil aviation. Some problems remain to be solved. Problems involved in moving commercial carriers at speeds and altitudes encountered only in military flight today. Supersonic military planes have been around for years, but they have different economic and maintenance requirements from commercial aircraft. So despite the Air Force development of this plane, the experimental B-70, for the first time in aviation history, there is little technology and experience that commercial planes can borrow from military aircraft. Under NASA management, a research program on the XB-70 will make some contributions to the development of the SST and other high-performance aircraft. While the new planes may share some of the characteristics of the B-70, they still must have all the long-term reliability and ease of maintenance our commercial airliners have always had. Engineers are looking into the effects of the shape of the airplane and the curvature of the wing in an effort to make the plane more efficient. Positioning of engines is still being researched. Studies of airflow over the wing suggest that improved design may also offer better control of the boundary layers of air, the air moving closest to the aircraft's skin, reducing drag or friction, and therefore the power needed for flight. Any reduction in the power needed to lift an SST of these proportions would increase its efficiency and reduce the cost of its flight to the airlines and to you. Lewis engineers are also working to develop new lubricants and metals that will survive extreme high temperatures for long periods of flight time. Alloys of tungsten, chromium, and nickel, and the fiber reinforcement of metals all look promising. NASA engineers are working on advanced engines to find out just how to vary the geometry of inlet and exit nozzles. The trick is to find what size and shape inlet and nozzle passages should be for all possible operating conditions. NASA research may help to give tomorrow's passengers an even more comfortable, safer, and more economical flight at supersonic speeds than that experienced in today's subsonic jets. For example, storms can be seen and their effects predicted. If they're severe enough, they can be avoided altogether. But a kind of disturbance known as clear air turbulence can't be seen or predicted. It can cause high-speed planes to hurtle up or down without warning, occasionally injuring passengers. NASA is working to improve the response of the airplane to the turbulence and to develop an instrument that will warn the pilot in advance of its presence. What about the pilot and the increasing demand on his abilities? Will he be able to work efficiently with the number of flight instruments he'll have to scan? Will he have ample time to react to emergencies? What is the proper balance between automated systems and the use of man's vision and senses? Is the pilot in danger of being overwhelmed by the sensations he feels during high-speed flights? One interesting NASA experiment permitted precise measurements to be made of pilot reaction times under stress. Two experienced pilots, one actually responsible for flying the plane, the other simply an observer, flew together in this jet under breathtaking conditions. Both men were wearing electronic devices which allowed researchers on the ground to monitor their pulse rates during the flight. The idea was to find out which of the two would respond more to the apparent danger, the man in charge or his passenger. Surprisingly enough, this experiment showed that the man with the responsibility, the pilot, reacted far more to the stress or risk of this flight than his colleague in the back seat. Closer to the ground, NASA is looking at types of fog and methods that might be used to disperse it in the vicinity of airports. And in another area of aviation, NASA is working with owners and manufacturers of light personal airplanes like these. The performance of these small planes is checked in good and bad weather, and the skill and energy necessary to fly them is evaluated. A big part of this research is directed toward creating an electronic system that will relieve the pilots of the problems of aircraft stability. The objective is to make these planes safer and easier to fly, and perhaps someday as easy to fly as driving a car. While research continues in studying the characteristics of planes flying today, NASA pilots also simulate flight in aircraft not yet built. Flights, for example, in the SST. Computers are programmed with the anticipated characteristics of the aircraft and the in-flight situations likely to be encountered. These are fed to the pilot, and he learns the feel of the plane, which he will actually fly someday soon.
Right. clear to Oakland via Jet 1.
Air traffic conditions of the future can also be simulated. In order to familiarize controllers and flight crews with air traffic conditions likely to be encountered when the SSTs enter commercial service, a joint government agency experiment is being conducted near Atlantic City. These girls simulate the calls of flight crews flying in and out of busy airports. For example, this girl is the imaginary pilot of Braniff Flight 210, a subsonic jet which is about to depart from Los Angeles.
Roger, Braniff 210, contacting departure control 854. Los Angeles departure control, Braniff 210 is airborne off of Los Angeles.
Her in-flight maneuvers, along with those of the other girls flying imaginary aircraft, are fed to these air traffic controllers. Tied into this activity by telephone are pilots working at Langley in a simulator which behaves much like an actual SST. The pilots practice the procedures of flying from Paris to New York, taking their directions from the air traffic controllers at Atlantic City.
Roger, NASA 1 is clear to the Orly Airport via the Kennedy 080 degree radio, Jet 62, flight plan route. Cross Victor 1693 at or below 15,000. Climb and maintain flight level 600, report out of 550. And NASA 1's ready for departure.
Together, these men are practicing now for years ahead, learning to integrate the bigger and faster aircraft into tomorrow's air traffic conditions. One of the most serious problems confronting the aviation industry today is noise. NASA pilots and engineers are investigating ways of minimizing the noise associated with commercial flight operations. For example, NASA pilots are studying a slightly steeper approach to landings than is made today. These aircraft are equipped with special devices and controls which permit the pilots to stay precisely on the steeper flight path, and less power is used. The noise of the landing plane is therefore reduced and is less noticeable over an area near the airport. In other experiments at Lewis Research Center, engineers are listening to the sounds of a jet engine, trying to find out how it can be made to operate more quietly. This work will provide engine designers with a fuller understanding of where the noise is coming from and what can be done to suppress it. When the SST comes along with what someone has called that carpet of thunderclaps, the sonic booms beneath its flight path, noise may be even more of a problem than it is now. At the Flight Research Center at Edwards, a NASA pilot daily accelerates to hit the speed of sound and unleash one more in a deliberate series of sonic booms. Down on the desert in houses built in the middle of nowhere solely for these experiments, families live for a while each day with the roar of jets and the measured shock of sonic booms. But all of this has to do with a more or less immediate future and the appearance of an operational SST on the American scene. NASA is working far beyond the supersonic transport to define the form and characteristics of a plane that will fly 5 times the speed of sound. This is the HST, a hypersonic transport for commercial use in the future. Flying 20 miles above the Earth at 4,000 miles per hour, this hydrogen-burning express may not have windows. You won't miss them. Crossing the United States in less than an hour. That may seem far-fetched today, while commercial jets still take nearly 5 hours to make the trip.
Starting countdown. 3, 2, 1, release.
Well, 20 years is the lead time in this business, say NASA's aeronautical scientists and engineers. 20 years ago, NASA research delivered the Bell X-1, the first supersonic airplane. Now, engineers are getting ready to use this plane, the rocket-powered X-15, as a test bed for mounting a hydrogen-burning engine of the type the HST may use 20 years from now. Meanwhile, these air travelers may find more pressing problems to be solved, still waiting for them on the ground. Less than an hour's flight time separates New York from Washington, D.C. today, or San Francisco from Los Angeles. Often, it's a longer ride between any airport and the center of the metropolitan area it serves. Perhaps that's why the airplane is starting to get more attention as a means of easing the short-haul transportation problems afflicting the crowded regions in which most of us live today. Short-haul aircraft may enable us to thin our crowded urban areas. Spread both industry and homes over the countryside with greater convenience to us all. This is one reason, at least, why at NASA's Ames Research Center, the ground falls suddenly away beneath an experimental V-STOL, vertical and short takeoff and landing aircraft. Planes like these might make it possible for you to live and work in a country setting, and yet still be less than an hour's inexpensive air ride from the city holding you today. There are engineering problems still to be solved to make the V-STOL aircraft as practical as they may prove to be. Some problems related to power and power distribution. Other problems related to instrumentation and pilot control. NASA is doing continuing research in both these areas. Because movement in any direction is possible in V-STOL aircraft, precisely controlled maneuvering about all axes is required. Any design for general use must be simple and safe to operate, and the planes must be able to fly in all kinds of weather. Better sensors are needed to give the pilot immediate readings, telling him to what extent and at what speeds he's moving up or down, right or left, from a straight and level path. Instruments must tell him how fast he's speeding up or slowing down, how much stress, pressure, and turbulence his aircraft is subject to. For all these factors, the pilot must compensate continually, automatically. This may require new control systems and continued investigation of the man-machine relationship. But once design objectives have been met, and full advantage can be taken of the flexibility these unusual aircraft offer, they may do much to help us break the grip of ground transportation which chokes our crowded cities today. Why not? Jet transports have brought closer together once far distant countries. Cities in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa, cities in Southeast Asia and the Far East, cities in the North and South Americas, once days or weeks or even months apart, are now only hours away. The SST will tie as closely together whole areas of the world that are thousands of miles and therefore still days apart. Within as short a time as the next 20 years, the HST may have an even greater effect on the organization of our world and the way in which we live and work. These stall aircraft may work a similar change in our lives, and sooner than we think. Only the fact of change itself is constant, someone said once long ago. Our world changes more rapidly with every passing year. NASA's 50 years of probing the phenomena of flight has contributed greatly to this rate of change. In years to come, as in the past, NASA's aeronautical scientists and engineers will certainly be challenged not simply to keep pace with the changes in our world, but to help set the pace of change itself.